Have you ever wondered why some agencies seem to easily hit like $1 million in revenue and beyond, post photos on Facebook of how many Lamborghinis they've bought and how they travel the world and win awards, and everything seems so simple and easy, but other agencies, maybe even yourself included, seem to struggle month by month to even hit decent numbers or even turn a profit, and you think, what's their secret? What do they know that I'm not doing? And so what I want to do in this video is outline exactly what's standing in the way of your particular business hitting the revenue that you want, how to identify exactly what you need to change, and of course, share that millionaire secret that all these hyper successful and super smart individuals know that you seem not to. This video is not a long form sales video that promotes like a course or some training program that I've got. I do mention a few tools that I have, and I will use the links to them down below if you want to use them. So I've helped dozens of agencies hit 6 and 7 figures a year, and I've done it myself. So while I can't tell you what everyone else does will guarantee success, I can tell you what I've done and what I've seen works, and I hope that that's good enough for you. But before we get into all of that, in order to understand how to hit 7 figures and beyond, I need to tell you a bit of a horror story about a 7-figure business owner that I know who, unfortunately, almost tried to take his own life over the stress of the numbers that he was trying to hit. Imagine this bucket is the $1 million goal. Roughly each liter will be about $100,000. And let's say that at the end of the year, this bucket is tipped out and we have to start again from all of the revenue that we've built up. The problem is that most agencies are filling their bucket with a 25 milliliter shot glass. Look at this tiny little thing. If you were to pour 1 shot into this bucket every day for a year, you'll never fill it with 10 liters before a year is up, and then the bucket then gets tipped out. The problem is that too many businesses are using shot glasses to fill up their bucket, and they're spending all their time and energy on the wrong 3 things. First of all, they're being really careful not spilling any of the water from the shot glass while pouring it into the bucket. Secondly, they're making the journey from where they fill up the shot glass to the bucket as fast as possible. And number 3, they have a tendency to want to make the shot glass look as pretty and cool as possible. I have a friend who was running a $1 million a year agency. It was actually over that, a bit like this. And on the surface, he had a phenomenal business. He had a large team, he had lots of clients, he had lots of awesome projects. He charged high prices, he had a decent profit margin, he was traveling all over the world and seeing clients and attending networking events. And on paper, he was the picture of agency success. Until one day, he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital to treat severe depression, and he had even contemplated taking his own life. It was actually his wife who sent me a message to tell me what was kind of happening to him. Let me be super clear. There is literally no business on earth that is worth losing your life over. Nothing on earth is worth the pain and the misery of taking your own life. But this is how bad it had gotten, right? You see, he was spending so much time and energy focusing on taking the shot glasses carefully and quickly to the bucket that he was basically burning himself out. He was working 60, 70, 80-hour weeks, he had no free time, he barely saw his family, and he began to resent the business. But, like all of us, he had bills, he had a mortgage, he had staff, he had clients, he had responsibilities, right? So he couldn't just walk away from it. He had become trapped by his own success. So how did he fix it? Well, he had to radically change his approach to filling up the bucket with water. It wasn't about transporting the shot glass faster or safer. So imagine that you could only use 1 shot glass and you could only fill the bucket once per day. What's the one massive glaring problem with what happens with when the bucket gets tipped out at the end of the year? So if you remember, I said at the end of the year, you know, if you try to hit 1 million, when you start the next year, you have to start from the bottom again. Well, what if we worked on that part of the problem and we kept all the water that spills out year after year? So $1 million a year is roughly 84,000. It's actually 83,300, but for the sake of easy maths, let's do it as 84 grand a month. That is 21,000 roughly per week. And that equates to, if you're doing a 5-day working week, $4,200 per day. Now that works out to be roughly $525 per hour, but that's assuming that that's an 8-hour day where you're able to charge the customer 525 hours for a full working day. So each shot glass has to be worth around $4,200 every time we pour it into the bucket. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a lot of responsibility for carrying $4,200 and pouring that into a bucket. For my private consulting, I charge $1,000 per hour. To make $1 million a year, I would have to consult with 4 people per day, 5 days a week. I don't know about you, but if you've ever done consulting, you'll know that talking to 20 individuals each week for an hour is exhausting. So we need to change how we're filling our bucket up with water. Now you might just be thinking, well, why not move the bucket closer to the tap or even under the tap? Or why don't we just make the shot glass bigger? And remember, later on, I'm going to explain to you the one secret that all these $1 million successful entrepreneurs on social media won't share with you, and that explains why they're crushing it and why you're not. So there are $1 million single person businesses out there. I even know a few of them, but on the whole, they're working 50, 60, 70 hours a week and they're crazy, crazy stressed. If you remember my friend from earlier, we want a 7-figure business that doesn't cost us 7 days a week. So what I want to show you is what a 7-figure business looks like that affords plenty of time off and gives everyone on the team plenty to do. So I've got a friend who is a composer and a conductor for an opera house in Germany. He studied maths at Cambridge. He's super smart. He's also really good looking. He's very charming. He's very, very funny. It makes me sick. But his role is essentially leading the opera house. Right? He decides on the operas that they'll perform, the interpretation they're going to use. He also auditions people and he manages the overall business. He does not run around every single performance trying to play each instrument at once and then jumping on stage to sing before jumping back down to conduct the orchestra. Now, I happen to know that he's a brilliantly talented musician, and again, it makes me sick at how good he is at this stuff. And yes, in some cases, he probably is better at certain instruments than some members of the orchestra, but he'll never take over that individual role because he understands that the symphony is more powerful than one solitary instrument. If you remember that secret that I kind of told you about later on, you want to bear that in mind. So this is how your business would look. We start with a leader. That's most likely going to be you. And then under them is usually a manager of some kind. And then we have 3 aspects to the business. We have sales and marketing, we have operations, and we have admin and finance. There are 7-figure businesses that have like 1 person in each role. There are 7-figure businesses that have like 5 people in operations and only 1 person doing the admin. There are 7-figure businesses where the leader, maybe you, does the sales and marketing and the vision, the manager does the admin and finance, and you have someone else doing operations. This has got nothing to do with team size. It's got everything to do with knowing what your role is. If I had to ask you to guess the #1 thing that prevents any business from hitting 7 figures, what do you think the guess would be for that kind of roadblock? It's not how hard you work or your education. It's not the product you sell. It's not even how you're selling and marketing. Ready? The problem is you. It's the owner. You, the owner, are the single largest roadblock standing in the way of your business earning $1 million a year. And the massive mistake you're making is not allocating a specific role to yourself. If you've ever wondered why your team seems to be kind of all over the place, or why you have to check in with their work or correct their mistakes, it's most likely because you don't have a defined role for yourself and you don't stick to it. Now, I know a lot of people watching this will say, well, it's my business. I'm the only one who knows how to get it done. It's my business, so I can kind of do what I want. And you're actually kind of demonstrating my point for me. I've never met a successful business where everyone else hasn't been able to clearly define what everyone else's role is, including the leader. A really good litmus test for this is ask your team, what's my job? Like, what do I do 8 hours a day? And if they don't all say the same thing, that's usually a good sign that you don't have a really clearly defined role. And if you don't have a really clearly defined role, your team won't have clearly defined roles. But remember that 7 figures a year isn't all it's cracked up to be. So if you remember my friend from earlier who was working his ass off and almost came to ending his own life because of the stress, I've actually seen this a few times, more times than I would even care to count. And in fact, in my opinion, what often breaks businesses is not the failure, it's the success. Anyone can work themselves into the grave and have a ton of cash left over, but what's the point in that? And also, making $1 million a year is missing a key vital ingredient. If you ever ask anyone who's actually run a $1 million a year business, they'll congratulate you if you hit that number, and then they'll ask you one thing that actually matters. Are you profitable? Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. Revenue is talk, profit is trousers. Do you guys have that? We've got all talk, no trousers. It's like a thing in England. Revenue is bark, profit is bite. Revenue is a wide river, profit is a deep river. WeWork had revenue of 3.4 billion. The Lehman Brothers had revenue of 60 billion. General Motors had revenue of 149 billion. And all of those guys are bankrupt. I'm sure there's some very clever people in the comments explaining to me how these companies actually were in the market expansion phase of the business and how investors don't want profits at that point and they're really in the customer acquisition phase, blah, 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 blah. Look, you can justify it and desperately perform mental gymnastics to explain how a business that does billions in revenue goes bankrupt is a success, but I'll take profit over ruining people's lives and losing money any day of the week. My point is that revenue is a meaningless number to focus on. Profit is what matters. And of course, if we want to run a profitable business, be it 6 or 7 or even 8 figures or 9 or whatever, we need to figure out where we are now and how to get to the next step using a framework that I've got. So if we take a look at where we are now and how we can get to $1 million a year, remember our bucket from earlier? The 3 big problems are that we're trying to fill a 10-litre bucket with a 25 milliliter glass. We can only fill it once a day and the bucket tips out at the end of the year. So the first thing we're going to fix is what happens with the water that gets tipped out at the end of the year. Now, when I figured this out, it literally changed my business overnight. Previously, I'd make a sale, I'd have to run around then finding another customer. This is because I knew that after I'd collected my payments, within a few months, that income would be eaten up. Plus, at the end of the year, I'd have to start again. The water in the bucket would get tipped out, right? So what if instead I could keep the water? What if I could recycle the water in my bucket? So I wrote out a really simple table to work out how much I could keep for the next year and how much I'd have to tip out. And what I did is I wrote out the source of the income to start with. So things like websites, projects, maybe I did some consulting, we would do campaigns. And then of course we did have things like retainers and we had software. And then I would work out, well, how much income does that give me? And maybe for a website in total, it'd be like 25 grand. Like some projects, I don't know, 10 grand maybe. Maybe consulting, we do 1,200 a year, something like that, I don't know. And we do campaigns for like 5 grand a month maybe. And then there'd be retainers at 2,500 and maybe we'd have software at 97 a month. And then I looked at the keep or tip, and what this meant was at the end of the year, does that income basically evaporate? And then I would look at whether I actually get to keep hold of that money, or am I going to see that money come into the business again? For things like websites and one-off projects, they would be tipped out essentially at the end of the year. Same with consulting. Campaigns as well, we would often do them on like a 12 or an 18-month project kind of retainer. Some retainers, yes, things like software I would get to keep, but what I found is that something like 95% of my income was tipped out by the end of the year. So I was almost having to find all of my revenue again from scratch. Now, yes, a lot of that time I'd be reaching out to previous customers, but I still had to like pitch, sell, close, deliver. And my income looked something like this. Basically, it was kind of going up and down and up and down, because at the end of the year, that number kind of like resets. But instead, what I wanted it to do was to look like this and just keep going. By focusing on scalable, recurring revenue, I was getting closer to building a longer-term, sustainable and profitable business. Now, it meant, yes, that I was focused on slower growth, but the jump to hit $1 million a year got smaller and smaller and smaller. So now what happens when I tipped my bucket out, I knew that some of the water would automatically go back into the bucket, requiring less and less income over time. But of course, the question then becomes, well, how do I make that growth happen? So we need to look at two very simple revenue models that will tell us three things. First of all, how far you are from $1 million. Number two, how much work is required, like how realistic it is. And number three, what you need to do to hit that next stage. Your business, like on your path to $1 million, lies somewhere on this graph. And each one of these represents a $100,000 a year income in revenue. And each stage roughly equates to $8,400 per month. So in order to jump to the next stage, you need to add $8,400 a month in revenue, and then so on average. And now in order to understand how you're going to do that, we need to look at a second graph. What we need to figure out is how big the gap is. So along the bottom here, we've got a year. So this is Jan, and this is December. And on the bottom left here, in this box, I want you to write out what your current average monthly recurring revenue is. Now remember, recurring revenue is the goal. We know we need to hit $8,400 a month in order to hit those $100,000 marks, and each one of these here represents 1 month. And trust me, this is all going to come together. So in the bottom left, I want you to write how much you're earning right now in recurring revenue that you know is going to be put back into the bucket once it's tipped out. Now it might be 0, it might be 10,000, it might be 50,000, whatever it is, I just want you to write it in the bottom left. So I'm actually going to start with 0. Let's say that we've realized all of our income is project-based, not a problem. And at the top, we know that each jump to get to 100,000 is essentially $8,400 in revenue. So I'm just going to put 8,400 bucks. Simple. The next thing we need to work out is, now that we know that by this point here, by December, we should be at $8,400 per month, I need to figure out what that gap is. So the difference between the bottom figure and the top figure. And in this case, it also happens to be $8,400. If it was $0 and $10,000, the gap would be $10,000. And so we're going to put the gap divided by, and this is where it gets tricky, your average price. Maybe you have a software package that you know you can sell for $500 a month. Maybe you have a consulting package that you sell for $2,000 a month. Maybe you are trying to sell websites for $2,000 and put them on a $100 a month retainer. I don't really care what the price is, but I need you to figure out what's the core offer that you're going to go for. This gives us the number of sales that we need. So in this particular case, it's about 17 customers, roughly. So we know that we now need to make 17 sales at $500 in order to hit the next kind of jump in revenue, right? And now we just divide that by 12 because there's 12 months. And so again, on average, this is going to give us about 1.5 customers a month. So it's roughly 3 customers every 2 months. And so I'm going to say 1.5, 1.5, 1.5. And now I know that in 2 months, I just need to sign 3 customers. So now you have a roadmap and a blueprint to figuring out exactly what your next step is in order to hit a $1 million a year business. And hopefully going through this, you've figured out what's standing in your way. It could be your pricing is too low, or maybe you don't have a standard price. Maybe you come up with a number that's like 100 sales and you think, well, the last 3 years I've only done 8 sales, so how is 100 sales going to work? You're looking at your expectations. You're also looking at sustainability. If you think you're exhausted last year and you look at these numbers and you think, well, now I have to work twice as hard, is that really going to happen? And so finally, we reach the stage where I tell you the secret that all of these millionaire influencers seem to know that you don't seem to get. And this is the part where I'm going to explain why some businesses seem to skyrocket and some struggle. And so I'll reveal that hack to you about whether there's some secret Facebook ads hack or a secret Amazon listing that you don't know about. And we're also going to figure out why that dickhead on Facebook can boast about holidays and new cars and masterminds and working with celebrities and receiving awards. They're probably lying. That's the secret. First of all, there are seed businesses that are financed by a much larger company. It's actually relatively common for very big agencies to say to one of their managers, here, we're going to give you a few $1 million. Why don't you go out, start a new brand and attract some new types of customers. They give them massive amounts of money to attract new customers, which essentially feeds into the larger agencies. They generate a lot of revenue and they like to boast about it, but they actually rarely make any profit. The other one, like I said, is they're probably just lying. There is so much out there where people are so desperate for clout that they'll gladly lie about the amount of money that their agency makes. So shock horror, some of it's bullshit. They also potentially have been going much longer than you give them credit for. You might see them as an overnight success, but you don't know if they've been doing this for 10 years. Maybe they like to massage the numbers to make it seem like they're millionaires. I am staggered the amount of businesses, especially on YouTube, agencies who call themselves a 7, 8, or even a 9-figure agency, and they'll say, we're a $10 million a year agency. But when you dig into their numbers, what they actually mean is that they've booked $500,000 worth of leads for their customers, and for some reason they think that that makes them a 10 or $100 million agency, which is obviously insane. And the other thing is they might have spent $1 million to make $1 million. This is why revenue is so meaningless and profit is where it matters. Stop comparing yourself. If everyone else made trillions of dollars, but you made enough to live the life that you want, what do you care? Anyone who has ever really made that kind of money will tell you that $1 million is actually not as much as it sounds. It's around £7,800, and there are flats in London that cost more than that. Not nice flats, like regular flats. Remember, it's about profit. It's about what you keep, not how much comes through the business. And now that you understand how much you need to make, you probably need a marketing campaign that executes on that. Which is why I have this video here that talks through how to make a $1 million email marketing campaign, even starting from scratch, and will plan out an entire year's email marketing campaign for you. So go ahead and click on that video to get the entire email marketing campaign.